Welcome to The Explainer. I am so pumped you're here today because we're about to unpack one of the most fascinating strategic shifts we've seen in recent football memory. Today we're doing a comprehensive review of the Buffalo Bills' latest draft class by breaking down the latest reports and data, but look, we aren't just reading off a list of names and numbers, we're looking at a master plan. We are unpacking the overarching narrative of a franchise that is desperately trying to build the foundational depth required to finally overcome a legacy of past failures and secure a championship. There's a lot to dig into regarding how they're constructing this roster for a brand new era, so let's jump right in.
Okay, let's dive into this roadmap for today's Explainer. We'll start with a history of heartbreak, then move to building a new era. From there, we'll tackle bolstering the defense, reinforcing the offensive line and weapons, and exploring the special teams factor. Finally, we'll wrap it all up with a final grade and outlook.
Section 1. A History of Heartbreak.
You really can't understand the strategy of this draft without first acknowledging the historic pain surrounding this franchise. Last season, this team had a golden opportunity to advance, but the path was once again blocked. And that wait, it goes back decades. 4. This franchise carries the incredibly heavy, haunting reality of losing 4 straight Super Bowls back in the 1990s. Leaving this generational burden behind might be Buffalo's best option, because structurally speaking, many believe this is a franchise that should have absolutely won a ring during that historic run. Instead, that number 4 just lingers over every single decision they make.
And that past pain directly connects to their recent agony. 5. That's the brutal number of turnovers Buffalo handed over in last season's heartbreaking 33-30 overtime loss to the Denver Broncos, a loss that got their highly promising 12-5 season to a sudden, choking end. They simply could not get out of their own way. And it's that specific inability to get over the hump that made a massive organizational shift totally necessary.
Section 2. Building a New Era.
To actually break this cycle of choking and playoff heartbreak, you can't just shuffle players around. You literally have to change the structure. The old era was defined by those devastating turnovers we just talked about. But the new era, it represents a completely fresh start. Buffalo elevated Joe Brady to lead the Chargers offensive coordinator, and combining that fresh new leadership with the fact that they're prepping to play in a brand new stadium, well, it provides a very real foundation for a completely new era.
Now what's really interesting about this slide is how they handled their 10 draft picks heading into this new stadium era. They didn't have to panic at all. Why? Because before the draft even started, they addressed their 2 most pressing needs by acquiring defensive end Bradley Chubb and wide receiver DJ Moore. By locking down those blockbuster acquisitions first, the pressure was completely off the draft to find immediate superstars. Instead, their strategy shifted entirely to building functional, robust roster depth.
Section 3. Bolstering the defense.
Let's look at the tactical breakdown of how they use this draft capital to build a defensive wall, especially to support the guys they already have. Out of their 10 picks, the Bills went extremely heavy on defense, bringing a massive influx of versatile talent. They grabbed defensive end TJ Parker out of Clemson, a big 6'3", 263-pound edge rusher to support Greg Rousseau and Bradley Chubb. They added Davison Igbinosun, a tall 6'2" corner from Ohio State to handle taller receivers. They brought in Caleb Allams-Orr, a super productive linebacker from TCU, who racked up 130 tackles and can play both inside and nickel. Throw in safety Jalen Kilgore from South Carolina for depth up the middle, and defensive tackle Zane Durant from Penn State for pass rushing downs. Buffalo is highly specific here, targeting versatile tacklers and pass rushers to flesh out that depth chart.
But why these specific players, you ask? Well, last season, the Bills had 0 players with double-digit sacks. 0! And they had 0 players with more than 3 interceptions. That is a glaring statistical shortcoming. So when you look at drafting TJ Parker, who had 9.5 tackles for loss and 5 sacks in college, and Davison Igbinosun, you are seeing a direct strategic response to those exact weaknesses. They desperately needed disruptors and ball hawks.
And speaking of the secondary, check out this incredible number, 4.32. That is the blistering, combine-leading 40-yard dash time for a cornerback, run by Toriano Pride Jr. The Bills snatched him up in the 7th round. Because they're purely focusing on depth right now, Pride doesn't have to start on day 1. He's going to be given the time he needs to develop his game, all while bringing absolute track speed to that cornerback room.
Section 4. Offensive line and weapons.
And this brilliantly illustrates their balanced approach, because even at new leadership and DJ Moore in the fold, you still have to protect your assets and provide secondary options.
On the offensive side, they added Jude Bowery, a massive 6'5", 314-pound offensive tackle out of Boston College in the 4th round. In the 7th round, they added even more interior size with Armarsh Reed Adams, a 6'6", 314-pound guard from Texas A&M. This shows a very clear, calculated effort to protect the trenches and ensure their new offensive system has the sturdy depth it needs to survive a long, grueling season. Sandwiched right between those linemen is a fantastic weapon, Skylar Bell, a wide receiver out of Connecticut, taken in the 4th round. He brings incredible college production numbers with him, 101 receptions, 1,278 yards, and 13 touchdowns. He's a highly versatile receiver who can line up either on the outside or in the slot, making him the absolute perfect complement to DJ Moore. The source material for this actually makes a great little quip here, hoping that general manager Brandon Beane doesn't throw this talented rookie under the bus. If utilized correctly, Bell adds tremendous value to this receiving core.
Section 5. The Special Teams Factor. Special teams is usually the most overlooked phase of the game, right? But in a tight playoff matchup, it literally changes everything. The Bills found a truly fascinating weapon here in the 7th round, Tommy Doman, a punter out of Florida. Doman is going to vie for the starting punter position, and for very good reason. Across his 50 punts last season, he averaged an incredible 4.5 seconds of hang time. That wasn't just good, that actually led the entire FPS. When you give your coverage team 4.5 seconds to sprint down the field, you completely neutralize the opponent's return game.
Let's move to and see how this builds a suffocating field position advantage. Looking at the breakdown of his 50 punts, exactly 17 of them, which is right around 1/3, ended up pinning opponents deep inside their own 20-yard line. By drafting Doman, the Bills are securing a highly reliable method to flip the field, which is absolutely vital for a team looking to relieve pressure on its defense.
Section 6. Final Grade and Outlook. We've seen the history, the structural shifts, and the tactical depth additions across all 3 phases of the game. So how do we evaluate the whole shebang? Well, the final grade for this draft class comes in at a C+. Now don't let that grade fool you into thinking this was a failure. Far from it. This grade reflects the reality that this was a functional, depth-building draft rather than a flashy one. Because they'd already acquired big names like Chubb and Moore, they simply didn't need a headliner draft class. Adding team depth across the board worked out great for what the Bills actually needed in this exact moment.
So, the crucial point is captured perfectly in this blunt, sobering truth from our source material. Buffalo really just needs to stop giving away games in the postseason. It all comes back to those 5 turnovers against the Broncos, doesn't it? You can draft all the depth in the world and you can build a gorgeous new stadium, but ultimately, execution when the lights are brightest is the only thing that matters.
Which leaves us with this final, burning question to ponder. Is this newly built roster depth finally enough to push the Bills over the hump and end their history of heartbreak? They've elevated Joe Brady as offensive coordinator, acquired stars before the draft, and brought in a 10-man rookie class dedicated strictly to fortifying the trenches and the secondary. The pieces for a new era are undoubtedly on the table. Now it's just a matter of whether they can finally put it all together when it matters most. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep your eyes on how this depth chart shakes out as this season approaches.